President Trump announced his tariff plans last week. It comes after the president made a major change to his policy today. The president pausing tariffs for 90 days on trading partners that have not retaliated against the U.S. and reducing tariffs to the blanket 10% that went into effect over the weekend. I want to get right over to NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans. Christine, that's part of the story. Let's start right there. The Dow seen that post on Truth Social and just taking off.
Taking off. I mean, unbelievable rally there. And as you said, cutting in half the losses, more than half the losses in the last few days that were all tariff worries. This is the president saying that he is pausing those really big, many saw as damaging reciprocal tariffs and just keeping the 10% on everyone. Things stay the same for Canada and Mexico, but then really turning the screws on China, 125% tariffs on China there. So the market just exploding here.
So that's the other big headline. The 125% tariffs on China, that advancing, but that not spooking the market.
Yeah, no, because I think the fact that the president stepped back after saying he was going to keep these tariffs on and they would be permanent. How many times did we hear there would be no negotiation when? Now the president says there's 75 countries that they've been talking to and then they will try to negotiate. What this means for the stock market is that there's wiggle room here, that they can see that maybe there could be a way to avoid a recession. They can see perhaps a way that really damaging super high tariffs won't stay on forever. They're just looking for anything that is an off-ramp.
Any companies that stand out to you that had a banner day today with this change in policy?
Yeah, we saw Walmart just explode higher. Very good day there. NVIDIA, that's the chip maker. It had been really beaten down this year. It bounced back. Even Apple, which makes a lot of stuff in China, bounced back, partly because other places it's been shifting production to, like India. They saw lower tariffs, some tariff relief in places where Apple has been looking to try to diversify.
All right, Christine, stand by for us because we know that this could change at any moment, so stand by for us. President Trump spoke to reporters just within the last hour about his decision to pause tariffs. Here's some of what he had to say.
They all want to make a deal. Somebody had to do what we did, and I did a 90-day pause for the people that didn't retaliate, because I told them if you retaliate, we're going to double it. And that's what I did with China, because they did retaliate. So we'll see how it all works out. I think it's going to work out amazing. I think that our country is going to be at the end of a year or shorter, but I think we're going to have something that nobody would have dreamt possible.
Okay, we also want to show you some live pictures right now. President Trump is inside the Oval Office. He is signing an executive order from what I'm being told by our control room. Wow. This doesn't have anything to do with the tariffs right now, but these are live pictures coming in from the White House, which has been a very momentous day for the president. Garrett Hake has been following it all for us. Garrett, walk our viewers through what exactly happened today. It essentially was one post on Truth Social that totally swung the markets in a different direction.
That's right, Tom. That post coming at the conclusion of a meeting that the president was having this morning with his Treasury Secretary and Commerce Secretary. The Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, then came out immediately after the post, was kind of the point person for defending this about-face from the White House. He described it as all basically part of the president's plan, suggesting that the president had set a trap for China by raising tariffs and then watching to see who would retaliate. The Chinese retaliation caused this new retaliatory measure from the president, and then the president's decision to back off some of these other tariffs to focus more specifically on China. But in that following press availability that you just played a bite from, we also heard from the president describing his own thinking. He talked about people in the markets getting yippy. He described the bond market overnight as queasy, and said that he watched an interview this morning with Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, who during the course of that interview said that if there were not a break in the tariffs, we could tilt into a recession. So despite what we heard from the Treasury Secretary saying this was all part of the plan, the president's own thinking seemed to lean towards being concerned about the market's reaction, the broader economy's reaction to this tariff, and a need to find some kind of off-ramp or way to declare victory and move on, Tom.
Yeah, and it's clear he has a foil in all of this. He's been very clear about that. It's China, 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 and he's not backing down. In fact, he's making things even hotter with that country as well.
That's right. By increasing the tariff rate to 125% on China, he, I think, is perhaps hoping to draw out Xi Jinping into negotiations. He suggested as much in that earlier press availability. He'll also get more backup on that point from congressional Republicans who have long viewed China much more skeptically even than the president has. A lot of them have been urging the president privately and in many cases publicly on television to focus his ire, to focus his desire to reform global trade on China, who they see as sort of the world's least fair actor in that space. Even some Democrats share that view. And so the president finds himself on more crowded and perhaps more comfortable political turf by focusing his trade war on just China, or at least mainly China in this moment, because it's important to note that some of the earlier tariffs on Canada, on Mexico, on auto parts, on steel and aluminum appear to all still stay in place at the previously set levels after this announcement today.
All right, Garrett, you stand by for us there at the White House as well. We thank you for that report. We want to go now to the New York Stock Exchange and our good friend Bob Pisani, who's been tracking all the movements of the stock market all day, speaking to traders and investors as well. Bob, kind of give us a big picture here, because it's not just companies that are dealing with foreign trade and exporting and importing. It was really across the market, stocks were up.
This was one of the broadest rallies I have seen, and I have been with CNBC 35 years and here at the New York Stock Exchange since 1997. So the Dow Industrials moved 8% in a day. That is remarkable. The S&P 9%, and then the NASDAQ, where a lot of technology stocks, 12%. And you heard from Christine, NVIDIA's up 18, Apple up 15, Amazon was up 12. But not just that, non-tech stocks had an amazing move. To Disney up 12%, Goldman Sachs up 12, Nike 12, American Express up 13. You get the idea of the magnitude of the move here that we've seen here. So the president claimed victory on tariffs. He said 75 countries had reached out to make a deal except for China, but we don't have any specifics on what kind of deal these countries are seeking to negotiate. So there's sort of the X factor that's floating around. But for others, at least a lot of people down here, DeSay's decision to pause reciprocal tariffs was a clear sign that the president had blinked. And it may not have been just this 20% drop in the stock market we've been seeing, Tom. In recent days, bond yields have been rising, and that, some believe, implies the market is expecting very serious inflation coming ahead. And nobody, including the Trump administration, wants to see higher interest rates. Nobody. And that may have been the final straw that caused the president to blink here. So recessions are not good for your image. Stock market crashes are not good for your image. So the takeaway today here is what we now know is that while the president has a higher pain threshold than many thought he had, he does have a pain threshold. Apparently, today was the day.
Bob, while we have you there, can you walk our viewers through what that moment was like? It was around 15 p.m. Immediate action from your vantage point?
I'll tell you how. Floor, but off of the floor, doing a show, and all of a sudden I heard a cheer up on the. You don't. On the floor that often anymore in the middle of the day. Usually bell rings at the close because they're at 1:20. I'm in a room right off the exchange here, and cheers start erupting, and I stood up and looked at my producer and said, what happened? And I walked outside, and then all of a sudden you could see the stock market had been moving. So there's not as many people as there used to be 20 years ago down on the floor, but it sure sounded like it at about 1:22 Eastern time.
Bob Pisani, so great to have you down there. We appreciate all your reporting. Christine, I do want to come to you because Bob sort of opened the door in the conversation there, right? What is the long-term goal here, and what can we expect those 90 days? Is it going to be a lot of this whiplash, or do you think we'll get to a point where the world knows where President Trump's head's at?
Well, when you talk about investors today, there were fortunes made and fortunes lost on a big day like this with that big spread. When you talk about business owners, they still have uncertainty, Tom. They still have, in 90 days, they don't know what the playing field is going to be. And
they can't fill out orders because they're not sure what it's going to cost.
Exactly. They don't know exactly what it's going to be. So this uncertainty has been has had a chilling effect on business. And you've seen that in the business sentiment indicators and a lot of these surveys that we do. Business leaders would like to know what the playing field is going to look like sooner rather than later. So this pause is welcome. As you can see, the stock market is saying we like this pause. They still don't like the tariffs overall. We have to see how much fortitude the president has to do these negotiations and what the final playing field looks like.
Those 90 days, are those 90 days for these countries to negotiate and hammer out their plans for the final tariff percentage, or is it just a pause to see what happens with the markets and what's going to happen with the shipping industries?
It sounds as though there are negotiations already happening. We know Japan is sending a delegation to Washington. We know that South Korea is sending a delegation to Washington. The president has sort of bragged about the 70 plus countries that have come to, I won't use his words, but have come to talk to him, and to play up to him to try to get what they want. So now we know the negotiations are underway. It took 2 years to get the Mexico-China accord. So it takes a long time to get a good trade deal. It looks like he wants to do these country by country.
I want to check in with Garrett before we wrap this up. Garrett, what can we expect from the president throughout the day today and these negotiations over the 90 days? The White House characterizing it as countries just calling into the White House, begging to make a deal. Is that the truth?
Well, Tom, the White House is not releasing the list of those countries, so it's almost impossible for us to fact check without going spinning a globe and calling up these different nations. But we know, for example, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, said he's already met with the Japanese ambassador last night. He described these negotiations as bespoke and said that the president would be personally involved. And I can just say, generally speaking, that tracks. The president views basically all diplomacy, all these global issues as about personal relationships and personal connections. The idea that he might be able to flip through his phone and get different leaders on the phone to negotiate these deals one at a time, I think is the kind of thing that appeals to him. One to watch, though, is going to be China. The president has long wanted a deal with Xi Jinping. Remember, there's also the outstanding discussions about TikTok. All of that's going to go through China at some point, Tom.
All right, Garrett Hake reporting for the White House. Garrett, Christine, Bob, we thank you all.